stand for freedom. Though freedom is never really free, we yearn and strive for government, protecting our liberty.
Good evening and welcome to Your Right to Know by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Mary Lotze and I am your host for this evening's show. Joining me tonight is a very special and a very valuable guest for us to have at this time in our nation's history. And I'm very pleased to welcome Jessica Vaughn. And Jessica is the Director for Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies, which I will allow you to explain what it is in a moment, but thank you so much for coming and being with us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
And for our viewers, Jessica's name and face may sound a little familiar because she's been on many national TV shows and Boston TV shows and radios and interviews because of the topic of immigration that really is so timely right now. And we're going to do a little special thing tonight that we're actually taping two shows back to back because this is such an important topic and it is such a timely, critical topic facing the elections in 2016 and as we go forward to finding a new candidate for our president, that we really want to get this topic explored and really discussed. So without further ado, let's dive right into the topic, which is going to be a discussion on immigration, sanctuary cities, and everything that's sort of rolled up into that. Could you explain a little bit about what the Center for Immigration Studies is, just briefly, so we get a sense of what you do?
Sure. The Center for Immigration Studies is a research institute, and we focus on the impacts of immigration on American society. When I first started on this issue, I formerly was a consular officer with the State Department. Immigration policy was made by just a handful of members of Congress and the special interests that were looking for an advantage to their personal interests. They would lobby for changes to immigration law, which nobody else paid attention to at the time. Our mission is to provide fact-based information, often based on government data, that shows what the impact of our policies are and what is being done by the government on the immigration issue. I cover the operational side of immigration policy, which is visas, benefits, immigration enforcement, what the government agencies that deal with immigration are doing. I have a colleague, Stephen Camerata, who analyzes Census Bureau data, labor market data, and also is a specialist in the fiscal costs of immigration. And so he takes that side of the portfolio. We cover the whole range of immigration issues from refugee and asylum to state and local policies and everything in between. Do you find that the politicians, our elected officials, use your data, or it just seems to me at this point in our society, we've become so polarized. Our politicians have become so polarized. They're looking for which special interest group they can get votes from, so that they're not always they make decisions not always based on data, but based on emotions or drawing support from a certain political group. Do you find that they use your studies a lot? Most definitely, and the news media as well, and the general public. Other researchers use it because we do things that are a little different, because we approach the issue from the standpoint of the national interest. We're not looking at any particular ethnic group or, everybody has their own kind of gimmick, but we, as I said, rely mainly on government data and look at it in a slightly different way, and with the national interest in mind. And that, yes, we are one of the most frequently quoted groups on immigration, and we probably testify before Congress more than any other research institute on this issue.
Oh, outstanding.
And the immigration issue in particular, so much of the debate is motivated by emotion or people's personal experiences, and that's important too. But for policy-making purposes, we really need to have good data.
Right. And that's actually where we're going to jump off, is when I first talked to you about coming and doing the show. This was maybe a number of weeks ago, and the hot topic at that time was sanctuary cities. And that hit the news because of one man, Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, in his presentation coming out as a candidate, made some considered disparaging comments about illegals, Mexicans especially, Hispanics coming across the southern border. And that sort of blew up into a hot topic. And then right after that, we had a very public murder in California, in San Francisco, right. Katie Steinle. So let's talk about sanctuary cities. It appears to me that the history of sanctuary cities was based on good intentions originally. Is that true? Or is it always a little suspicious?
Well, most definitely it was based on good intentions. Whether that should be, if that's the best emotion you can say that's about something,
the emotions again.
That's not enough in terms of public policy. The sanctuary movement, per se, started in the 1980s when we were getting a lot of illegal immigration from Central America. And the people who were coming did not qualify under the law for refugee or asylum status because they were not being persecuted by their home governments. But they were coming here illegally because at that time, especially the southwest border was much more porous than it is today. And they would get into the country, and church groups primarily wanted to shield them from deportation because of their perspective on the reasons for the conflict in Central America, the Civil War and civil strife that was happening then. And so they would put them up in churches in the recognition that federal immigration agents would not pursue these people into churches in order to forcibly deport them. They were right. It has morphed into, entire cities declaring themselves to be cities of refuge and not connected to asylum, but just in opposition to immigration enforcement.
And in Massachusetts, we have, 6 or 7 cities?
Right now, as of today, we have 5, and one of them is brand new. Boston became one last year when they passed the Trust Act, the relatively new governor, Marty Walsh, signaled his support for it, but it was passed by the city council. Somerville has been one a little bit longer. Amherst, Massachusetts.
Chelsea.
I want to say it's I think it is Chelsea, and also now Lawrence, Massachusetts.
Lawrence has.
Lawrence is the brand new one, really within the last week.
Yes, because their mayor, Mayor Rivera, I believe, has always been very strongly against Lawrence being a sanctuary city.
That's right, but the city council decided to pass this ordinance that basically gives them the same sanctuary policy as San Francisco and Chicago and a few other places in the country. The most extreme sanctuary, they are now the most extreme in the state of Massachusetts and one of the most in the entire country, because they under their ordinance, are preventing local law enforcement agencies from cooperating with federal immigration authorities in the deportation of anyone who is arrested. So that anybody who is arrested by Lawrence police and ICE says we want to deport that person, they are completely obstructing that by preventing ICE from getting custody of them. They won't let ICE in the jails or the police departments. They're not allowed to share any information, and they're going to release these people. Let's say somebody, you have a gang member who's been deported before, comes back and gets picked up on for driving without a license, or maybe arrested for shoplifting, some offense. And ICE knows he's there because of they now. The Secure Communities program allows information sharing of fingerprints. So ICE will get a hit that this person's been arrested, that they're looking for, but Lawrence police will not allow them to take custody of them directly from the police station. ICE will have to go out and look. The police will release them back into Lawrence, and ICE will have to go look for that person if they can find them.
Can the ICE enter the city of Lawrence, the city property of Lawrence?
Yeah, they can't control that.
Okay.
But it makes, the purpose of this, and I think it's important to note that the police department of Lawrence did not ask for this
I
policy.
believe that.
The politicians on the city council decided that it would be to their political advantage there
Here
to
again.
have this policy. And in my opinion, they've been very misleading about what the impact will be. Any illegal alien criminal arrested in Lawrence will be released by Lawrence police instead of turned over to ICE for deportation. And I just can't think of any logical reason why a city would want to shield criminal illegal aliens from deportation. They'd rather release them to the streets. I don't see how that improves public safety in any way. In fact, it puts people at risk.
I would think the people, the residents of Lawrence, the voters would be outraged about this. And I can only go back just to this past summer on July 4th, where I think she might have said her name, Myrta Rivera, who was a nurse, 48 years old, was shot and killed in her bed while sleeping by 2 illegal aliens who had been deported numerous times trying to seek asylum, but was shot and killed in her bed as a bullet went through the floor. And they were, if I'm not mistaken, drug dealers.
Yes.
And that happened in Lawrence.
Yes, that's the charge they were arrested on, was the drug charge. Meanwhile, here's the other end of this, is that, so they, ICE has put detainers on those individuals, but they wouldn't at first because, according to national policy put into place by the Obama administration, ICE is not allowed to try to deport anyone until they have been convicted of a serious offense. So we have a situation where these guys, prior illegal aliens, they've been deported before, they're involved in drug dealing, they kill a woman in her own bed, and ICE cannot take them into custody. The local police can't charge them yet on the murder charge because they have to be able to demonstrate probable cause that they're the ones who did it. They have to arrest them on a drug charge, but that's still not enough under Obama administration policies for ICE to take custody and try to deport them. They're going to have to wait until they get convicted, if it even happens, before ICE would be allowed to take any action. So not only is Lawrence a sanctuary, the Obama administration is working hard to make the entire country a sanctuary as well.
Well, and you say that the Obama administration is working hard to make the country a sanctuary nation, but we have in our own state a representative, Byron Rushing, and Byron Rushing has brought up legislation to make Massachusetts a sanctuary state.
That's right. How our lawmakers on Beacon Hill can even consider this after what happened this summer with Kate Steinle's murder and numerous other murders that have occurred.
Well,
Hers
we have
was
Kate Steinle out in California. That was San Francisco. We have another lady who, what is her name here? I have it, Marilyn Farris, and that was also in the west coast of
Santa Maria, California.
And she was brutal, not just shot outright, but she was brutally raped and murdered in a heinous act. And I mean, we could go on because there's just so many young people and old people alike. I mean, there's no discrimination in age,
American citizens
race,
and immigrants
or
alike
whatever.
are being affected by it. I mean, it degrades the quality of life for everyone and puts everyone
And it's random.
at risk. Yes.
Which is
Right.
part,
These criminals aren't going to stay in Lawrence.
right.
Because Lawrence has a sanctuary policy. They're not going to stay in the city of Boston or Chelsea or Somerville. They they don't know borders of countries, much less towns. So it's a problem, and yet some lawmakers in our state, again, I don't believe they're motivated thinking that this is good for public safety. They're motivated by what they see as political advantage, and are introducing Mr. Rushing has introduced one to make this allow, basically open up all benefits and services to anyone in the Commonwealth.
Yes, and I'd like
regardless of status.
to describe some of these benefits. I had them written down in my notes, but it's health, it's education, it's housing, it's training, job training, wealth, all the welfare benefits that are available.
And it would be driver's licenses
driver's
too. He didn't spell that one out.
And one of the numbers that I came up with. This is per Howie Carr, so people out there might say, okay, where does Howie get his statistics from? But Howie Carr's research in Massachusetts, I believe it was Massachusetts admitted an annual $1.8 billion in welfare benefits to illegals. And that was just 1 year in Massachusetts alone. And that's what all this encompasses.
That statistic came from the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which is another activist group and public policy group based in Washington focused on this. Yes, it's a huge sum of money that's involved here in providing benefits. And not only is it expensive and does it lead and leads to criminals being released, but it really just encourages more illegal immigration. When people realize that they, can live here as if they were legal and have all of these services and benefits available to them, and that they face very little risk of deportation, they're going to choose this as a place to come.
Sure.
And we know from, I had the opportunity last summer to review an intelligence report from the Border Patrol about the crisis in South Texas with all the Central American kids and families coming over. And Massachusetts was one of the top 10 destinations that people were telling the Border Patrol they were headed for.
Sure.
And, so we shouldn't be surprised when we get more illegal settlement, when lawmakers are talking about these policies, even if it isn't passed. I think lawmakers would be crazy with the budget situation in the Commonwealth to pass something like this, and yet they're talking about it. And sometimes I wonder, do they really want to pass this, or do they just want to talk about it and gain political favor with certain groups?
From what I'm to understand, as I've been doing some research on this, our local Central Massachusetts, Worcester County, our own cadre of representatives and state Senate, are not supporting it at this time. Not just, and I'm speaking of not just the Republican ones. We have Sheila Harrington, and was one that I read, but even the Democratic ones seem to be questioning the benefit of doing this. But stay tuned,
I would like to think
they
common
say.
sense and a good hard look at the state's budget ought to help people be clear-eyed on this. And it's not a question of not wanting immigration. It's a question of not wanting to be unfair to legal immigrants or attract illegal immigration. And with these sanctuary policies in particular, I would like to think almost everyone can agree that those illegal aliens who are here committing crimes ought to be deported.
Really should be deported. And if they pass ICE fingerprints and they have been guilty of committing crimes or coming across the borders numerous times, then they need to either be incarcerated or sent back, whichever the appropriate. When you mentioned or both. When you mentioned the southern border, last year we did have, or the couple of years we've had this influx of children and mothers coming across. And yes, many did come to our state, Massachusetts, and settle into some of the big cities. At the time, there was a lot of concern that many of these people who were coming across were, in fact, terrorists, whether it be actual Muslim extremists, because there were things like prayer rugs, prayer beads, actual artifacts found that were left by the people coming across, or also gangs, MS-13, and some of those very violent gangs. Do you have any numbers or knowledge of the truth behind who was really coming across the borders?
Well, it is true that the Border Patrol has apprehended people of concern because of ties to terrorism in the last year. There's that's true. For example, there was a case of a couple of men from, I'm trying to think of whether it was Turkey or Afghanistan or both. Well, they certainly apprehend people from all the countries across the globe, but there were some whose ties to terrorist groups were confirmed. They were apprehended at the border. They were held in custody and then released One of them was later caught in Canada. That's how it became news that the United States had released them, even after apprehending them, even after knowing of their ties to terrorism. We also know that if a mom toting a toddler and a baby can get across the southern border, then so can someone who is being funded by a terrorist group do it very easily. There also are well-documented ties between the smuggling groups that do the transporting of people across the border, that organize it, because it's controlled by the cartels.
The cartels.
That border is controlled on the Mexican side.
They call them the
yes,
mules.
it's controlled by the cartels, criminal trafficking organizations, or criminal organizations that do all kinds of organized crime. The smugglers work for them. And we know that many of these groups do have documented ties with terrorist groups, as do some of the street gangs that have a presence in both Mexico and in El Salvador in particular, that they have ties with organizations like Hezbollah and other radical and designated terrorist groups. So it doesn't take much imagination to understand how easily someone with terrorist ties could enter the country illegally over the southern border, either by posing as someone who's just coming for economic reasons, or through actually, arranging it through this network of criminal groups. They don't care who they smuggle over.
Right.
Some people poo-poo this idea and say, oh, they would never do that. They would never want to attract the attention of U.S. law enforcement. That's nonsense.
Right.
Number one, they might not know who the person is, and number two, they'll take the money from anybody.
Of course.
So.
And then once they're across the border, we know they're given hearings. They never show up. They disappear into the countryside, into the cities.
Right.
And nobody knows where they are, and nobody tracks them or follows up on them.
Right.
I find that as we're looking at this, especially with the sanctuary cities, and the sanctuary state, and the sanctuary nation, which is mind-boggling. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? Is it up to the Attorney General of the United States, the state Attorney General? I mean, where do we go with this to try to get control over our nation?
Well, I mean, it does seem like an overwhelming problem. There's no question that there's a lot to be done. I do have hope that this can be turned around. The first thing it requires is leaders who are willing to put some effort into it and devote some leadership and resources and will to addressing this problem. The first thing we should be doing is enforcing the laws that we have on the books, and allow the men and women who work for the Department of Homeland Security and the enforcement agencies that are part of that department, allow them to do their job. Right now, current policy under the Obama administration is that only people who've been convicted of a serious crime can be targeted for deportation. And that applies even to the Border Patrol to a certain extent, that they must release people who say that they have family here, for example, or say that they're sick, or say that they have community ties. All these people get a free pass.
Sure.
A former official with the Obama administration's Department of Homeland Security said that there's about a 1% chance that any illegal alien here would ever be targeted for deportation. So that's the first thing, is we need to take the handcuffs off the
And how many people are we talking about?
About 12 million
12
is our
million.
latest estimate.
And 1% would be targeted.
At the most.
Yeah.
And so we've got to turn that around. And there are ways to do that. But I tell you, it only takes a modest increase in enforcement to see a real deterrent effect, where people start saying, I don't think it's so easy to get across anymore. I don't think it'll be so easy for me to get a job anymore. I don't want to be detained. I don't want to live there in the shadows, so I'm not going to try anymore. So, and for that to happen, we need to do more than just enforce our laws that we have. We need to address the job magnet. And the best
Which
way,
would be employers.
yes, employers, and hold them accountable for who they hire. We need to address the problem of visa overstays, because right now we don't know even who's not leaving when their visa has expired, and that's probably almost half of all illegal aliens right now. And we need to secure the border and do more deportations from the interior, and address these sanctuary cities as well. And we didn't get here to this situation overnight, so we can't solve it overnight.
Right.
But there are definitely things that can be done.
I said before it was mind-boggling, but the good news is we have another half hour. You're going to see it in January 2016, but I'm going to continue talking with Jessica Vaughn. And we will thank you for doing the first piece of our show, and we thank you for watching Your Right to Know and sitting in with the FRCC. And as we leave you, we'd like you to remember that your local city and town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your constitutional rights and your conservative values. We encourage you to join us. Why? Because to us, GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity, and because we always stand for freedom. Thank you.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for a republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.